Hi class, this is a video on the square root property of solving a quadratic equation and completing the square. So let's get started. Okay, say we have this equation. Well, how do we solve that? Well, we just take the square root of both sides. Okay, so the square root of this is going to be equal to the square root of that. And so we have x is equal to 3. But it could also be equal to minus 3, because it's really the absolute value. This turns out to be the absolute value of x is equal to 3. So x is equal to 3, or x is equal to minus 3. And we basically just say x is equal to plus or minus 3. So there's two solutions. So we started with x squared was equal to 9. Does 3 work? Yes. 3 squared is 9. Does minus 3 work? Yes. Minus 3 squared is 9. And that's basically the square root property. Say we have 2x squared minus 5 is equal to 45. Well, just even if this was just 2x minus 5 is equal to 45, you just solve for x. Here we just solve for x squared and do the square root property. So we first add 5 to both sides. So we get 2x squared is equal to 50. We divide by 2. X squared is equal to 25. Now we take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to plus or minus 5. So x is equal to 5, or x is equal to minus 5. And do they work? Let's plug in 5 here. 5 squared is 25, times 2 is 50, minus 5 is 45. So it works, and the negatives cancel. I mean, x squared minus 5 squared is 25 times 2 is 50, minus 5 is 45. So they both work. Okay. Say we have a situation like x minus 1 quantity squared. Okay, is equal to 9. Now what do we do? Well, now we just do the square root again. And we get x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 3. Now we add 1 to both sides, so x is equal to 1 plus or minus 3. So x is equal to 1 plus 3, which is 4. Or x is equal to 1 minus 3, which is equal to minus 2. So here's our two solutions. Does 4 work? 4 minus 1 is 3. 3 squared is 9. Yep. Does minus 2 work? Minus 2 minus 1 is minus 3. Minus 3 squared is 9. And it works. So you just take the square root again and then solve for x. Okay. If we have x squared plus 6x is equal to 2, well, we do something that's called completing the square. We take this number, 6, divide it by 2, which is 3, and then we square it. 3 squared is 9. And we add that to both sides, plus 9. All right. Now this turns out to be a perfect square. That is equal to x plus 3 quantity squared, right? A little side here. That's x plus 3 quantity squared is equal to 11. All right. Now we do what we just did before. We completed the square by taking half of this, right? X plus 3 times x plus 3. Right, that's x squared plus 3x. X squared plus 3x plus 3x. And then finally plus 9. Right, x squared plus 6x plus 9. And that's why we take half of the 3, because we get a 3 there and a 3 there. and then the product, the squaring of it, becomes the 9. So we complete the square. Now what do? Well, we take the square root property, so x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 11, right? That's not a perfect square, but that's fine. So then x, we subtract 3 from both sides, is minus 3 plus or minus square root of 11. So we have two answers. X is equal to minus 3 minus square root of 11, and x is equal to minus 3 plus square root of 11. This is a negative number, and this one's positive because the square root of 11 is a little bit above 3, right? Square root of 9 is 3, so it's positive. Two numbers, and there we go. Okay, let's do another one of those. If we had x squared minus 8x, and then plus 2 is equal to 0. All right, so let's complete the square and do it the way we solved it. So this number is an 8. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So we want 16 here, so we'll add 14 to both sides. Okay, so we get x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to 14. Now we could have subtracted the 2 over to there and then just added 16 to both sides. You get the same thing. So we have x minus 4 quantities squared is equal to 14. Now if we just started with an equation like that, we just do the square root property. X minus 4 is equal to plus or minus square root of 14. And then we add 4 to both sides. X is equal to 4 plus or minus square root of 14. So two answers, x is equal to 4 plus square root of 14, clearly a positive number, or x is equal to 4 minus square root of 14. That's still a positive number, because it's a little bit less than square root of 16, which is 4. So this time we get two positive numbers, but two answers. Okay, fine, let's do an application. Say we had the structure, we had a guide wire of 50 feet, and we wanted to plant that 20 feet away. Where do we have to put that on the structure? What is x? Well, Pythagorean theorem, we get 20 squared plus, right, Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So we get 20 squared plus x squared is equal to 50 squared. Okay, now we solve for x. So we just take that one over there. So we have x squared is equal to 50 squared is 2,500 feet, and 20 squared is 400. So we get x squared is equal to 2,100 feet, and actually feet squared. Now we take the square root, and x is equal to officially plus or minus the square root of 2100, but since a negative doesn't make sense, we just use the positive, and it's equal to the square root of 2100. Okay. Which is about 45.8 feet. Okay, certainly less than 50 feet, but that's exactly where we want to put the structure there. We can tie that up on. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful and was helpful to your learning. Cheers.